So, welcome everyone. I was a bit inspired by Nathan's talk 2 weeks ago, was that? Or 3, something like that? Or actually more. Was it more? It was more. 3, yeah. So I was inspired because I'm a musician myself, and I love doing things with patterns as well, and had a few experiments. And I made this thing called SonicQuiz back when I was an undergrad, studied psychoacoustics, among other things. So that's about 15 years now. And, well, actually, I've shown it to a few people along the line, but I never really wrote a paper or anything. It's a bit of a pilot study, and it has to do with recognition of different patterns. So the first thing is, I will introduce the parameters. So I have 6 types of parameters along which I am creating patterns, right? So normally it's just the page, at least from Nathan's talk, we're looking at the page. The funny thing is I'm hoping to strike a conversation after this as well, in terms of how we conceive of these things. In any case, what we have in supercollider implementation of patterns is that the time durations is just another parameter within the pattern space, so to speak. So I think that's the really interesting one with this hierarchical kind of approach that Nathan has. And then obviously just see what these things are. So I'm just going to write them down as well, just because I'm going to be scrolling through these and they will be crucial. So my first parameter is the small interval, and the second one is the big interval. And the reason why I have these as a distinction is that psychoacoustically, these are actually different categories. So everything what is within a critical band, which is about 1/3 of an octave, is actually a different sensory kind of mechanism dealing with that compared to larger intervals. And also in terms of stream segregation, which I may or may not talk much about, there's a great kind of division, a great distinction between small and big intervals. The third one will be the amplitude. The fourth one is the duration. The fifth one is the timbre, so a different sound source in this case. And the sixth one is the pan, left and right. Okay, I might tweak the quiz not to include the panning ones, because that'll be a difficult thing. Okay, so I have these 6 parameters, and then I'll just briefly play them for you, so you kind of get friendly with those and get to hear them. So here's my small interval pattern. Yeah. Here is my big interval pattern. So this pattern, by the way, it has 2 elements. So this will be the other way I will kind of create complexity. Is not just by having different parameters available, but for each parameter there will be a certain cycle length. So this was a cycle length of 2 values, right? So you probably recognize that. And this is already a bit trickier, you see, because it's fairly fast. I mean, the way I've created these is to be tricky, right? So if it wouldn't be tricky, it wouldn't be interesting. So I wonder whether you can actually hear, or hopefully hear, not read from the code, what is the cycle length of this pattern. Again. Well, you kind of, yeah? Any ideas? 2, 3, 4? It's an integer value, obviously. I'm talking about how many elements, how many different values I have along this parameter axis. And in this case, it is 4. I will play it a bit slower. This is what you've heard, a bit faster. So if anyone's a musician or kind of plays an instrument, you can actually do this a bit better. I mean, when I did it initially, I had about 20 people doing it, and it was all nice and well done with the scores, and kind of I corrected it and gave them a percentage. And it was very curious because there was, I mean, everyone had about 35%, that was the large average, and then one person scored like 75%, like crazy. I mean, these things get really complex. And in talking to her, I realized that what she's a singer, and what she's been doing is she's been kind of memorizing the melody almost, the kind of the motion, the thing she hears, and then slow it down in her kind of reflection, and from there realize what's going on. So I mean, initially it is a kind of a pilot study to see whether there is primacy for these parameters, and you will see how I kind of hierarchically stack them. So we'll see how that goes. So those were the two pitch-based pattern parameters, then the amplitude. Okay, so this is a bit tricky again because the speakers are not loud enough to hear how many, but this is actually 3 values, yeah? And if I make this one much louder, oh, that's much louder. I can try to kind of dynamically compress these things. Can't really hear the other two, or maybe you're in a better position. You hear the first two kind of thing, and then the third one disappears.
They're not distinct enough, really.
It's not that
I
distinct.
could hear it on the first example, but it's very quiet.
Oh, right,
So
yeah.
they were more
yeah.
distinct then, so you could actually hear the.
Oh, yeah, that could be because of masking as well. Yeah. Cool. So, well, in any case, it's a kind of a brain exercise. Let's see if we can get some thoughts going. So that would be the amplitude. Then we have the duration as a pattern. Now this one is a bit complicated. Actually, I just see what I can do is I can always make sure that... Okay, now we're talking. Most of my patterns are running on amplitude 0.2. That's why it's also additionally soft. So with this one, actually it's quite difficult. I mean, if anyone's, we have a percussionist in here or a musician? Not really. I mean, if you can use your musical understanding to slow this one down as well and realize how many. I mean, I can do it here for you as well. Let's see. I'll make it. Oh, that was the wrong way around. Okay, so it's funny. Obviously, this is a tricky one, and it was initially made for a bunch of electronic music students and kind of community. So I had the chance to push it. So that would be the duration pattern, the type of parameter, and then one last is the timbre. Yeah, I will again make it louder if you have to. I guess everyone can distinguish 3 different timbres in there. Okay, and then finally the panning. Well, actually, now that I know how to make it loud, maybe is it panning at all? No. Unfortunately, we have a mono reproduction. We'll try to skip the panning as a parameter. Okay, so those are the 6 parameters, or let's go with 5 then. Skip the panning. Okay, that's a good idea. I did that already. So we have these 5 parameters. And then let's briefly look into the cycle lengths. Okay, so at this stage, I really wonder if I can shut the display and still hear the audio. What do you think about that?
Split your display instead of mirroring it.
That would be an option, yes. Let's try that. I'm a bit worried about this HDMI thingy. Okay, so now you don't see it. Okay, so I wanted to do a little test to see how well you can, first of all, figure out the number of elements in the cycle, in the pattern. Okay, so let's start with a small interval. And let's see what you guys estimate in this case. How many? 4. Yeah? Cool. Is there anyone who thought that was not necessarily 4? I mean, it's a kind of a funny question to ask, like, yeah, I'm an idiot. But obviously, you know, it's a different audience altogether, so I don't really expect you guys to flourish. And actually, I think I did it myself as well, blindly, and I scored under the 75% back in the day, so don't worry about not being very good at this. Okay, so that was 4. Let's stick with the small interval. I'll do something else here. How about this one? right? So, I mean, obviously it's simple. I won't even ask how many that was, 3, yeah? But just so you understand what I'm on about, I mean, I tend to believe that I express myself accurately, but in feedback I receive sometimes, I have to realize that it's not quite unambiguous what I say sometimes. Okay, so let's look briefly at the large interval, the big interval. I'll come up with something like this. Oh, it's a bit soft, but you kind of heard it. 2 elements, right? Fairly simple. Let's see, I mean, I'm reluctant to go beyond 4 elements because there is none like this in the quiz anyway, right? So I don't go into you having to count these things to start with. But let's do another one, who knows. I don't think I can confuse you, to be honest, with these things right now. But let's see. Can you count that? You can kind of count that? Almost. Okay, I managed to find it.
I was going 7.
All right. Shall we listen to it again? Yeah, I would say it's 5, but there's something funny.
It is, yeah.
Does anyone have a sense, I'm really curious, does anyone have a sense that this pulsation is not regular?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I was trying to count it rhythmically rather than...
Yeah, that's what confused me briefly. So I was like, wait a minute, because I was counting and I was like, oh, it's like it's not a regular pulse, but it is. It definitely is. So here comes the bit of psychoacoustics, you see, because we're dealing with the large intervals here. And that's what tends to cause stream segregation. Okay? So I won't go much into this, but in essence what happens, it's all the Gestalt principles that you might be aware of in terms of visual perception actually hold for audio as well. Right? So in terms of how you group things, how you perceive them, on a neurological level much deeper than your awareness, what you get is that these streams get separated. Right? So in terms of, for example, asking how many sound sources you hear, you could create a lot of funny stimuli that will show this. So typically proximity, right, is a Gestalt principle. So what happens if you have a stream of 2 notes, right, and they're sufficiently far apart in frequency and sufficiently near in time, then you will group them as in having 2 streams. Right? No matter the fact that it's a single stream going up and down, if it's fast enough and the interval is large enough, you won't hear it as such. I mean, and that's the funniest thing. I mean, I mentioned this case where someone claims to be able to slow down what they've just heard. Right? That's a very interesting phenomenon because actually it kind of highlights that you have an automatic set of whatever analyses that kind of inform you, right? But if you're really interested, you can actually dig deeper into that. And I mean, I think that should be obvious by now, although our paradigm kind of didn't shift enough for us to find it maybe self-evident. But the case is that in perception, you first get the highest level message, right? So when you enter this room, the first thing you know is, okay, is it a pleasant or is it an unpleasant thing? Right? So all these things in terms of all the visual input, all the audio input, they tend to first merge into this immediate impression, and then you have the capacity to go into the details. And similar thing holds for my field of vision, right? Because I don't really see pixels. And for those of you who maybe went a bit deeper into this, you know that there's neurological structures which kind of discern the vertical line from the horizontal one, and then in terms of the moving things, those are grouped very efficiently together. So I'm just trying to go a bit into this discussion. I won't go very far, but this discussion that has to do with the idea of homunculus, right? So that's the discarded paradigm by now. The idea that, okay, what is intelligence when it's a monkey behind the screen with a keyboard, right? There is no such thing as in the brain, right? So our intelligence arises from a very complex system, and there is no unit in there which would be the intelligent one, right? It is all a very complex processing scheme like that. Okay, amplitude. Well, let's just hear it. I think it's good to get friendly with these. How many elements in the cycle? Well, that's a funny one. But just because I asked the question, you probably get it. Maybe I can slow it down to make this a bit more obvious. Okay, so that's an amplitude cycle of 2 elements right there. You've heard both of those. Okay, and then the duration, well, this one gets tricky. I mean, obviously, for non-musicians even more so. But let's just try one. So how many different durations did you hear in there?
3.
Yeah? Any other ideas?
I still listening for amplitude, that's why.
You were listening for amplitude. Well, one thing I'll do, I'll play it again, but I'll make the long one a bit shorter, because otherwise it's too much waiting. Listen again. Any ideas?
Does that repeat?
That did repeat exactly 4 times, so that the patterns have a fixed repetition
2.
number. It was 2 durations, right? So this is a bit confusing because obviously it's a bit like a triplet, right? I mean, it's close to a triplet. But the question is how you define this. So that's where this discussion might happen, is in terms of what is the most natural way for us to define what a pattern is. Right? That's the real question, because it's not the question of how you can technically do it, you know, how you can mathematically model it and all these things. The real question, I guess, is what is the most meaningful way of doing this? And, you know, this is the point where the idea of time durations forming a pattern becomes indeed questionable, right? Because it seems like it's a rhythmical thing, but the kind of 2-cycle or 2-element pattern is a not necessarily intuitive way of describing this pattern. Okay, let's see how many different timbres you hear in this case. Okay, so we are on to the timbre patterns. Oh, sorry for that. I'll try it a bit softer. Yeah, how many different timbres? Anyone? Two different timbres. I mean, I didn't play the 3 because that was the initial example. And by the way, I don't have the 4th timbre in there. So as we do the quiz, you can know that there is no 4th timbre. Okay, are there any questions about this? So we have these 5 parameters. We have a pattern, a cycle with a certain amount of elements of distinct values for these. Yeah, that's what we're looking at. Does that make sense? Cool. So here come the hierarchies, right? So now the interest is, how do we superimpose these patterns in a meaningful way? Well, meaningful, I'm not so sure about that, but definitely in an exciting way, potentially. And the idea here is that I create a hierarchy such that, oh, actually I do have 3 colors. I was wondering how many colors should I bring. I thought I'll do 3, not even thinking that I will need them. So, oh, and there's a 4th one as well. So the idea here is that if I say, okay, let's do it this way, so small interval is a blue thing, so I will have value 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. Maybe I'll add another one, 0, 1, 2. Okay, so this is my small interval pattern of 3 elements. Okay, so if I put on top of that a big interval pattern, or actually let's do the amplitude first. Then what I'm actually doing is I'm considering these 3 elements to be a single element's worth for the next one up in the hierarchy. Okay? So that means that here I will then do, let's do a 2-element pattern. I'll have a 0.8 amplitude, 1 amplitude, 0.8 amplitude, and 1 amplitude. Right? So what I get then is I still get, what is this, 12 events, of which the first 3 will have 0.8 amplitude, 1 amplitude. Actually, these lines are a bit confusing, aren't they? They look a lot like my number 1. So I will have these 3 play a bit softer, these 3 playing full on, a bit softer and full on. And then I can actually take a 3rd one, because now I see that this is the pattern duration on this level. So on the higher level, I will actually, let's take a duration here. I will take this to last, whatever, 13 seconds, who knows. That would be too much, but never mind, 1.3 seconds. And here I will do 0.8 seconds. Okay? So now I get this situation whereby the first 6 events will actually play at 1.3 second, what they call inter-onset time interval. Is that it? And then I can actually stack up a fourth one as well. I can do a big interval here. And what I'll do is I'll actually add it to these because it's actually the same parameter, right? So if I do a big interval whereby this is a 0 and this is a 12, like an octave in semitones, then obviously what I will actually have here is 0, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, and then I will have 12, 13, 14, 12, 13, 14. Okay? But in a sense, what I have now is at the lowest level, I have a small interval pattern. One level up, I have the amplitude pattern. One level up, I have a duration pattern. And on the top level, I have a big interval pattern. And the nice thing is obviously that these parameters all contribute to single events, one at a time. So you get these lovely structures. Okay, does that make sense? So that's the way yes.
Yeah, what I don't see here is how you, so like you go from the blue level,
Yeah,
and then you're like lifting up like that hierarchy.
yeah.
So that, then you're splitting that into 2.
Yeah.
Would duration not be on the same level then, because that one's also split into 2?
Well, the thing is, it's you see, this one. So let's analyze this one a bit more. So the way I would write this one is S3. So I have on the bottom I have small interval 3. Then my next level here is amplitude with 2, S3, A2. Then the duration. Am I saying this right?
Yeah.
Oh, did I mess it up with the big interval? It seemed like
No,
I
you
did.
did, third was then duration.
The third was the duration. Well, actually, what I'm looking at is both of these are at the same level, so I did mess up. I think I messed up. I wanted the big interval to put it on the last thing, but you see it's on the same level with the duration. Is it not? I think it is.
You mean because it's the same length?
Yeah, it's the same length. So actually, it should be that for the duration already, the whole pattern is of this length.
Yeah.
So I would have a big interval which holds for all the 12 nodes, and then the next one would be there. So actually, I don't have a big interval pattern in this one. Does this clarify what you were trying to say?
Not really, because like I still don't see how you've got 2 duration sets. You've got the 1.3
Well,
seconds.
the thing is, I mean, I can do it with the dots.
Right?
I can do it with the dots.
Oh, right, yeah, I'm reading them as well.
Yeah, this
no,
one's, yeah, that's the
that's-
confusion. They used to
you need
be,
to write
well, let
it,
me
yeah,
do
that's
that.
right, you need
Does
to write them properly.
that make sense?
Yeah,
Sorry for that.
that's alright.
So
Okay?
it's dividing it.
Yeah, so it's S3, A2, D2. Okay?
But that notation is a bit weird, because it's not really a sequence, is it?
No, I mean, how would you? I'm really open for
There are a
suggestions.
bar between them, maybe, doesn't it?
Want to put a bar? Which color?
Red.
Red color bar.
Yeah, like that.
Okay? Sure. I mean, it's really open. I mean, there is no standard.
What are the numbers? The A2?
So the number is the amount of elements in the cycle.
So that would be A4.
No, because
No,
there's only two
two elements.
distinct elements.
Okay.
This is already the repetition of the cycle.
So you also do an expansion in your notation there?
Oh,
You're
yeah,
expanding it
exactly. I mean, the whole thing as it runs, it actually expands, obviously, yeah.
Well, that's a bit weird, though, because now we've got 2 twice, and I mean...
But that's not a problem. I mean, you can stack up 2 element cycles as much as you want.
But they're not actually... Well, yeah... No,
They're on a hierarchically
yeah, no, I
different
see what
level,
you're
so
saying.
they
Yeah,
always
yeah,
become
yeah,
distinct.
Yeah.
Okay? So we can also try a little exercise. Let's take 2 elements on the
The
bottom.
composition lifts it up,
That,
the
yeah,
level,
exactly. Yeah.
inherently.
Yeah, always looked at that. Yeah, any better?
I
Any
don't know how to do it.
suggestions? I mean, maybe a vertical thing would
That's what I was thinking, like,
Yeah?
like a divide or something.
Yeah.
The expansion of so the repetition, but expanding out repetitions is implicit in every function, composition you make.
Yeah, well, it's just a very specific way of notating something even more specific. It's quite.
Yeah.
But obviously, I mean, I think that because it is a kind of a tree structure, right? That's what's going on here. So you could try to notate that and kind of say, okay, this is a 2 pattern here. This is actually a series of 2 patterns, like a bifurcation tree. But as a matter of exercise, just to be friendly with this, we can do kind of 2, 3, 4 hierarchy. Try to spell that out. So what that would mean is that at the lower level I have 2 dots. Well, I'll kind of group them spatially a bit. And here we are back with the Gestalt. Why do you see these belong together? Okay. So that's my series of lowest level patterns which are grouped in 2. And then I would have to have 3 cycles there. So actually a group of 3 of these will give me, well now I'll play with the values, something like 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 0, and so on. Yeah? And then if I want to make 4 cycle pattern on top of that, well, then I would have to have 4 of these, so it would start here and end much later. I would have to have 4 of these. So actually if you multiply these numbers, right, then you get the total amount of elements in the whole big cycle right there.
Actually, so you do get R.
Yeah, it's the polymetric expansion.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Cool. You're discussing how this relates to your thing, I reckon.
Yeah.
I hope you will tell us more about that
Secret.
in a bit. It's a secret thing, oh god. We can pay you, can we get some cash for it again? Reveal the secret.
I mean, it's just the relationship, right? The least common multiple relationship between them.
Oh, yeah.
Just I mean, that's what you've described, really. That's all it is.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then you have to expand them out, like you were doing, because otherwise it won't fit with your 4.
Yeah.
That's it, really, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing here is...
You can have these different...
You want to discuss?
Well, our characters,
Yeah.
our pattern is parameterized by one thing.
Yeah.
But you haven't, though, right? You've parameterized it by a set of different things, because you're potentially changing. You're not just playing a note. You're now changing the note, the amplitude of that note. Do you know what I mean? You've parameterized it by more complex.
Oh yeah, of course.
So that's all the differences. I think it's just a cheap of possible things.
Well, that is the real question. I mean, what do you consider to be a property of an event? Right.
Exactly. So your event.
That's where the duration. I think the duration.
No, I don't think they are anymore. Yeah, no, it's exactly.
I think the biggest discussion is about the duration, right? Whether that is something inherent in the pattern, or whether it's something that has to do. Is it another parameter or is it not? Right? Because in your bit, what you have is that the duration is implicit in the ordering of the.
Well, I mean, I think that's an open question because I don't fully understand that, but this would get very complex if you're treating duration like as over a set of events.
Yeah,
See,
exactly.
To me, duration has to be a part of the event. It's actually the only thing that has to be.
Yeah.
Everything else can be a signal over that. But
Yeah,
the duration
that's the
has
big
to
question,
be embedded
exactly.
in the
Well,
pattern.
that's not the case.
But I must say that.
I think it is.
Because they compose. The whole thing is, and then they kind of sync it up, right?
You
So
couldn't have patterns. I mean,
But
you
the thing, I mean,
could,
from
but
a-
it would need so much composition of tiny patterns.
From a generative music point of view, that's a constraint. Because you can easily say I have a rhythmical pattern, which is duration 3 elements, and I have a melodic pattern, duration 4 elements, and you want them to phase in and out. So if the duration is strictly linked to the event, then you lose the power of kind of phasing patterns in and out. That's the issue there. I mean, I can create an example for this.
But wouldn't
If you're
you
interested.
can just expand them, right, and put silences in, then they will phase back in and out.
You don't need silences to phase them. You just expand them out next to each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, okay,
Expand
yeah,
them.
just
Yeah.
expand them, yeah.
But if the duration is linked to the event, there is nothing to expand.
The different sides.
Yeah, that wouldn't phase them. If you just roll them straight out, they phase.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. But if the duration is part of the event, then you cannot phase duration against pitch or anything like that.
Well, that only stands both pitch and duration are part of the event.
Well, pitch is the basic way you define the event, I guess.
Not,
I mean, you
no,
can't-
not necessarily. I mean, it's,
Okay, so
I
you
mean,
can-
it's in that Who Dat work it is pitch and duration.
Yeah.
But you can modify pitch so easily as an offset from that and relative pitch anyway. So if you just treat the initial pitch as relative pitch, then you could modify.
Then you could
using
kind of
signal.
get that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, all of these models, all of these ideas can account for pretty much all the scenarios. The question is, what are the requirements.
Yeah.
You know, why do you create a new model? Is it supposed to be intuitive? Is it supposed to be Turing complete? Is it supposed to be this or that? So obviously it's an open discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, well actually I'm taking quite a lot of time with this, so but I'm definitely getting to the quiz at some point. So let's see, now that you've seen the hierarchy, let's see if you can figure out which two parameters in which hierarchical order are audible, as well. These are a bit complex.
That's going to be quite difficult to distinguish, isn't it?
I know, when I first ran this, people said this is just insane, don't even... but the thing is that I have a lot of panic here.
You're quite good at that stuff. Us mortals.
You'd have to be a musician.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Because
There's
that
maybe
is,
some better
that's
speakers.
exactly how like a musician would hear that is
Right.
to sort of internalise the form and then put it back and like an
Depends on the musician.
Okay.
The least term of musician.
Let's
Not that
see, I'll
everybody
make it a bit slower.
Goal is a musician, I wonder if he did it.
Okay, here comes again. So we're looking for two parameters that are being changed. We're looking for their hierarchical order, and we're potentially looking for the amount of elements in the cycle as well. Okay, so yeah. What is changing the most frequently in here?
Small interval.
What is changing least frequently? What is the other one? Really funny. Listen to it again. Any other ideas?
Pitch.
Well, pitch is, there's two things with pitch. So actually what's happening here is that I have a soft event, it's the amplitude is the lowest one, and then a loud of the same kind, and then comes the next pitch, and I have a soft and a loud of the next pitch. Yeah? So there is, at the lowest level,
Play it again though.
I will do, at the lowest level, now you get it, now it's easier.
Yeah.
So at
But
the lowest...
it's hard to tell if that was a timbre as a change as well.
Very good observation. I mean, obviously, what you have in psychoacoustics is that the timbre changes with amplitude. So that's one thing.
Especially.
These speakers as well. But you get the idea, right? So so on the lowest level we have the amplitude changing, and then we have a large interval. Can anyone tell me how many elements do I have in the large interval cycle? 4. Yeah? It's a bit confusing. It sounds a bit like 2, but it's not. It's actually 6 semitones up, then 6 semitones down, and then 7 semitones up. So the second and the fourth one are kind of very close in pitch, and it can confuse non-musicians. I'm not doing this in order to annoy you, by the way. I hope you understand. Okay, so that's a bit of hierarchy. I have a bit more complex one here. Let's see how it sounds, and then I might actually slow it down or something. Oh, the amplitude is a bit low. And you get it. I mean, you actually hear, you can recognize the pattern from a second ago. Maybe you can. Yeah, does that sound somewhat familiar to the previous example? This one?
So
Yeah.
is it amplitude?
Okay, listen again, listen again. So
It's like
what
a
is
pattern
the
of 3 per ogre?
what is this? What is the similar thing in the two patterns?
The interval.
The intervals. Yeah. So the top level is equally made up of 4 large intervals. Yeah. But internally, so the smaller, the more frequent pattern is something different. Yeah. So try to listen for that again. Which duration, exactly. So there is a modulation of duration at the lower level. Now I won't ask the question how many elements, but we can try and guess. That's a musician's task. It's 5. Whatever. I thought it was 5. Maybe it's, yeah, it is 5. Yeah.
You're used to the first two of the did it. You expect the third one to go did it as well.
It's a bit tricky, and they don't conform to a grid. It's a set of random decimals that I just type in, and it's kind of a tricky thing. Okay. Now the interesting thing is, so this one in my horrible notation is D5S4. Okay. So I have a duration pattern of 5 elements, and then on top I have a small interval pattern of 4 elements. And just for the fun of it, I'll play you the other way around, the S4, D5. Right? Just so you get a sense of how this hierarchy works. Sorry, I'm going to have to make this one louder as well. And it's the kind of thing that is a bit more complex, obviously. When I previously did this, I think there were people walked out with a headache. So please, don't try to focus too hard. It can actually damage your brain. Maybe health and safety. It's like here, it's normal to always, exaggerate just to, not feel responsible afterwards. Okay, so I have that, and then here, by the way, in the original SonicQuiz, there were always 4 levels of hierarchy, so I won't take you that far, obviously, that would be a bit too much. But here I have introduced the 3rd level. So on the bottom, I will have the D5S4, this thing. And on top, I will have another pattern. So I wonder if anyone can tell me what that is. I'm fudging it a bit because it used to be penning. So it's not penning anymore. Amplitude. Amplitude. Yeah, fairly simple. So you had the whole pattern full on, and then a bit softer, and then full on and a bit softer as well. Okay, so last practice bits, and then we'll run the quiz. Here is a 3-level pattern. Okay, or actually, let's already call it a part of the quiz because we're kind of running out of time. So if you have some way of noting down numbers and letters, please do. Otherwise, I brought some papers and some pencils. So what I will ask you to do is, no matter the fact that most of these puzzles are very difficult to solve, we will be dealing with 3 levels anyway. So you can draw 2 vertical lines to start with, so you know what you're aiming at. And then even if you don't count something, you can put down the letter that represents the actual parameter. Or if you feel like you can count it but you don't know what you're counting, then just put the number down. You can kind of create a fragmented solution there. It's not a problem. So in all cases, we will have 3 levels, okay? I'm going to do a quick fudge here because of the amplitude problems. Okay, I'll give you a bit of thinking time. You can get your initial idea down. So what we're looking is for 3 levels and which parameter is present at which level. last one. Okay, here comes the next one. Similar thing, 3 levels. Here we go. I'll play a louder version immediately. Sorry for that, I'm gonna play a louder version now. Okay, and the final play for this one. Cool, here we go with the next one. Let me just check the amplitude, I have to keep checking that. Okay, here comes the next one. And the final play. And the very last example then, so we don't go too far obviously, and leave some time to analyze these. Here goes. I'm sorry for the amplitude, here goes again. I think that's horribly challenging. Shall I slow it down a bit? There goes a slower version. And finally, the slowest version. Let's give ourselves a bit of a chance here, I think. You have completed the Sonic quiz.
Wow.
At least a part of it. I'm gonna mirror back again so you can see what's been going on. So this was the first pattern. how it sounded. So the tricky here thing, oh my god. So the tricky thing is that there is a 4-element amplitude pattern, right? That's a bit hidden there. I mean, I kind of imagine that people get that the timbre is on the top level. Yeah, we get some timbre on the top level, 3-cycle timbre. That you get the whole pattern, and then you get the whole pattern played.
Middle.
What did you?
I done the same thing as that.
Middle.
All right. Shall we listen to it again? I mean, obviously there's no time to really explain the supercollider code here, but here you see it. It's S3, A4, T3, right? So I have a small interval, then I have the amplitude, and then I have the timbre. So the thing is that you kind of hear these triples 4 times, and then it changes the timbre. So that's the kind of clue to the hidden, supposedly hidden amplitude cycle in the middle. The B version, the second thing you've heard in the quiz was this one. It's a kind of a musically tricky thing. I mean, on top you have the small interval, right? And you have the 0 transposition, 2 transposition, 2 semitones up and then 1 down. And the thing that's confusing us normally here is that the 0 that comes after becomes perceptually part of that pattern because it's resolving it, right? So then you end up feeling like, oh, well, it never really ended because that resolution kind of doesn't happen. But that's what it was. So you had a timbre change on the lowest level, T3, 3 of those. So you had the same note with 3 different timbres, right? And then you had a 4-element amplitude right there. Okay? It's kind of a similar thing to this one. Actually, it is just the other way around. You see, the small interval and the timbre have changed places. So that was kind of the piloty thing about this, to see, okay, which one is easier to hide in terms of these patterns. Now, there is one issue with this. It's not very well made because the different timbres actually induce a different amplitude sensation as well. So that could be leveled better, I would say. Okay, and then going on, this was the third, sorry.
Yeah, that's the answer.
Okay, so here we had on the lowest level, we had 4 elements of a small interval parameter, doody-doody, yeah? So if you get the doody-doody, then the next one up will be the timbre, 2 different timbres, so you get the doody-doody with 2 different timbres, and then on top, we had a large interval, in this case, 2 large intervals, yeah? So that's the interesting thing here, that the bottom and the top parameter both adjust the pitch, but that's the puzzly thing about it, because if you realize that there is a timbre change in the middle, then it kind of separates, I would think. Okay, does that make sense? Shall we listen to it again? So this was the S4T2B2. Cool, and then the final one. Okay, it's not P anymore, I've changed that to amplitude. Somehow the duration pattern on top could be obvious, although I agree this one is very challenging. So yeah, that's the 4 simple ones. I mean, we have some time left. I'll just play you one complex one. I don't know, here's a 4. Something that doesn't have the amplitude in there, or the panning. I have to avoid panning. Although I think most of these. Here's one without panning. Well, I didn't make it louder. But you can imagine with the quiz where most of these things are 4-element things, someone getting 75% is like miraculous. So that's this little pilot study, and now I would like to have some questions or open discussions or ideas. And obviously we're not a psychoacoustic institution like that.
Well, that's what my question is on. Is that how did you consider when you were designing these how, like, perceptually things like can mask, so like the duration can be like thrown by having an amplitude in a triplet field which changes the kind of pulses.
That was the exact thing I was trying to understand.
Because that's exactly what happened for me in that last one. I got it round the wrong way.
Yeah,
Because of that,
exactly.
was it?
Yeah.
There's a few more things. I guess if you say that like you're never going to go over a cycle of 4, then it kind of makes sense. But the first one, for example, which is like the small intervals of 3,
Right.
group like 6 for me.
Okay.
Because like I get in like Western notation, we have like 6/8 compound time.
Oh yeah.
Feels like 6/8.
Of course. Yeah.
And then even when you throw in the fact that there's like, what was the other thing on it, like a timbre change, it's like you can easily miss one of those notes to be a different pitch and make it sound like a pattern 6.
Well, actually,
there's loads of like masking opportunities for masking.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you see, the thing is that I'm not starting from the idea that, you know, just like I said, we don't see pixels. So that's the point here. It's not like, and I don't even think we're rational beings like Descartes maybe thought. So, you know, it's not like we have a blank page and then, okay, so what are the phenomena that are written on the blank page? But our understanding, our perception is a mess, right? So to actually get anything like a structure from this perception, that's the tricky thing. And then this was actually the pilot to exactly highlight those things. It's like, okay, well, this could be a funny phenomenon, this could be a phenomenon.
That is really interesting. And I wonder then if you took all of the like sort of expressions that we've created,
right,
and then played them, sonified them, and compared the audio, like you might realize like, you know, there's attributes that are really similar. The one we described actually does sound similar.
Yeah. Sure.
So like it's really interesting from that like psychoacoustic masking sort of side thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there is also a big question whether it is, which part of this is peripheral processing and which part of it is actual cognitive. And that's the tricky thing, that's the most exciting thing, where you can actually reach into your peripheral processing, which is questionable. I'm not a neuroscientist. Actually, in Sussex, by the way, they're just advertising some PhDs in between neurology and music, which is quite exciting. It's a kind of a cross-disciplinary thing with a lot of potential, I would say. But indeed, the point was to highlight, okay, what are the funny things about how we hear stuff? Where does the cadence feeling override something? When does the 6/8 time signature override something? And that's the real question, is how peripheral that is. And to me, the real question is whether there is a threshold, to be honest, because I don't think there really is.
It's not a fixed one.
No, not a fixed threshold there. But definitely these expectations. I mean, in a way, there is psychoacoustic studies that claim that the meter is part of how you perceive the music, not embedded in the music itself, right? And that's one thing that I think we can also prove quite straightforwardly. You know. I mean, just as a matter of anecdote, at one day, I mean, I've actually systematically stopped listening to 4/4 meters at an age of 13, 14, I think. And after a few years, and obviously just playing those meters and only composing in odd meters, and after a few years, I distinctly remember hearing the clock in 7/8, an actual regular pulsation, and I was really freaked out initially. I was like, did I actually manage to go crazy? Because obviously that was the intention. And then I realized, well, that's what I'm doing. I'm just making the triplets out of the 3 and then +4, and I'm stretching them. But it was actually happening peripherally. It was happening below my sense of awareness. I was grooving to the clock, and I was like, oh, that's a great 7 groove. Wait a minute. It's a clock. It's an even pulse. That can't be. But it can. So if there's no other questions, thanks for coming, guys. And